start our history lesson for the day. We're going to be on lesson 23. We're talking about the Oklahoma land rush. And we're also going to learn about the Battle of Little Bighorn, which was just a sad battle. But we're going to talk about that a little bit. So let's look at page 73 in our book. Now, to learn a little bit, to review a little bit from yesterday, do you remember the name of the act that was enacted by President Lincoln that opened up the land in the West for the settlers, for them to come in? Do you remember what that was called? It was the something act. The Homestead Act is what that was. Now, there were some requirements in order to come under this. They had to get 160 acres of land. They had to build a house and make the land good, have a crop or build a house or something and live on the land and improve it over 5 years. And if after the 5 years this land was improved and better, then it was called theirs. It belonged to them. What was the name of those prairie farmers? Do you remember? It was a weird name. Sod busters. Remember that? We talked about those that lived in sod houses. All right, let's look at page 73 right quick. This is about the Oklahoma land rush. We're going to read a little bit about this, and I want you to be listening for the word reservation. Listen for that word as we read. Make sure you follow along with me. The United States government had settled many of the Native American tribes in the Oklahoma Territory. Each tribe had a reservation, an area of land set aside for its people. Nearly 2 million acres of land in Oklahoma had not been assigned to any tribe. The government decided to open this land for settlement under the Homestead Act. On April 22, 1889, the Oklahoma land rush took place. All along the borders of the unsettled land, people lined up in wagons, horses, and on foot. Even trains stood waiting to carry homesteaders across the border. At noon, cannons boomed and bugles sounded. The race for the best land was on. Tens of thousands of people claimed land in Oklahoma in one afternoon. People pushed stakes into the ground and set up hasty tents to prove their claims. These people were called boomers. Later, government agents learned that some people had slipped across the borders and claimed the land before they were allowed. These people were called Sooners. Some of the largest cities in present-day Oklahoma began during the land rush of 1889. And there's a picture there at the bottom of page 73. That's a monument in Oklahoma City. And it just reminds people of the land rush that happened that particular day. And also, there were some people that went across before the gun sounded, and they weren't supposed to. They were cheaters. They jumped the gun, and they went and they staked their claims before everybody else did. They were called Sooners. So have you ever heard of an Oklahoma Sooner? Yeah. Have you ever heard of a boomer? Yeah. Well, the Sooner State is what Oklahoma is known as being, and it was made a state in 1907 by President Theodore Roosevelt. It was the 46th state. So remember, the United States government had opened all those western territories, but by 1880 there was hardly any land left because people had gone to take all that land. So then they were eyeing Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Territory, and so the government decided to open it up. But to make it fair, they decided to have a race, and that's exactly what they did. Look at page 74. This says the Indians fought back. Buffalo hunts and broken treaties is what this says. Now, I'm going to read on these pages, 74 all the way to page 76. Make sure that you follow along with me because we're coming up to some very important things that you have to know, okay? Now, I want you to listen and find out which Native American tribes fought in the Battle of Little Bighorn. You're going to need to know that. So let's pay attention to this. Settling the western frontier brought exciting new opportunities for many Americans, yet for other Americans, it brought painful losses. For the American Indians, the taming of the West meant the end of life as they had known it for centuries. The Plains Indians depended on the buffalo. When they killed a buffalo, they used every part of it. Nothing was wasted. When white Americans moved west, the buffalo herds began to die out. The areas where the animals could graze grew smaller and smaller. Farms and railroads were built on the open grasslands. Hunters came west to kill buffalo and sell their hides to factories back east. Some hunters shot buffalo from the open windows of trains just for sport. They left the bodies to rot in the sun on the plains. With so few buffalo left, the Plains Indians had to find a new way to live. Once they had been free to follow buffalo herds, but now they were expected to stay on reservations. The government wanted them to become farmers like the white settlers, but many Indians were not interested in changing their way of life. Government officials made many treaties with the Indians. They drew up maps and set up boundaries. They promised that the white settlers would stay off the land that was set aside for Indian land, but these promises were not kept. Sometimes farmers and ranchers moved onto the Indian land, and sometimes gold seekers searched for treasure in the territory that belonged to the Indians. When the treaties were broken, the Indians fought back. Can you blame them? I can't. Now let's read a little bit about the Battle of Little Bighorn. One of the most famous battles happened in 1876. After white Americans entered the Black Hills in search of gold. The Black Hills were on a reservation for the Sioux Indians. Once again, a treaty had been broken and the Sioux were angry. The government sent the United States Army to the area. The Sioux joined with 2 other tribes and prepared for war. Their forces were led by Chiefs Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull. Colonel George Custer led one of the U.S. forces. He was a daring officer, but he was also a proud and reckless man. He had already fought some battles against the Indians. He had attacked and easily defeated a Cheyenne camp some years before. He had killed more than 100 people, including men, women, and children. He thought this battle would end the same way. But Custer was wrong. His men met the Indian warriors at the Little Bighorn River. The Indians had nearly 2,000 men. Custer had only about 200 soldiers. He had hoped to attack the Sioux camp at night and take the warriors by surprise, but the Indians found out he was coming. A surprise attack was impossible now. Custer ordered his men to advance toward the camp. Crazy Horse and his warriors were prepared. Thousands of Sioux rushed out to meet Custer's soldiers. Custer and every one of his men died that day. The battle became known as Custer's Last Stand, but the battle would also be a last great victory for the Indians. So, why was that battle even fought? Because the white people had gone on to the Indian reservation again. On page 76, you'll see a little map of the United States with a red square at the top. That's kind of where all this took place. And then the zoomed in map kind of shows you where some more Indian battles took place. Why did Custer's plan fail? Indians found out he was coming. How do you think they found out he was coming? Maybe they had spies. Maybe Custer and his men weren't being careful because he was so proud and reckless. Maybe he didn't cover his tracks like he was supposed to. I'm not sure. And how did it end? Custer and all the Americans were killed. What was the name of the Indian tribe that fought there? They were the Sioux Indians. And what did that battle become known as? Custer's Last Stand is what it became known as. All right, so let's work on a work text page real quick. I do believe there's just one page. It's page 32 in your work text. Okay, so we have, let me hold it up. This is supposed to be the front of a postcard, and this is the back side of a postcard. I see that my camera's zooming. I'll have to change it in a minute. We're almost finished though for the day. But on this, what you're going to do at the top of the post and on the front part of the postcard, you need to draw a picture to illustrate an experience that might have occurred during the Oklahoma land rush. Maybe someone fell. Maybe a wagon's wheel fell off. Maybe you could even draw somebody putting in a stake in the ground or putting up a tent real quick. Something that would have happened during that land rush. And then on the back of the postcard, which is at the bottom, just write a couple of sentences about it if you had been there, pretending like you had been there and you saw this land rush. They're just rushing in here after they heard the cannons fire off so that they can find some land. And you can just write that like you were there that day. And I'm not going to grade this page. I would like to see it if I could. So anyway, all right, if you have any questions, let me know. That's all for